I'd like to introduce Wilhelm van Rensburg from our Johannesburg office, a senior specialist, and Sophie-Louise Fröhlich, our decorative arts and auctioneer. And today we're going to be looking at highlights from session 2, specifically with regard to mid-century furniture, the collector's guide, and we're going to be looking at how mid-century modern has increasingly become a desirable category to collect. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and then I'm going to hand over to Sophie-Louise. And I think this is also just to make sure we've got some control of the screen sharing. So Sophie-Louise, are you ready? And then I think, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us at Strauss & Company. And we are in the programming of the first week of our April-May talkabouts with our upcoming sale at Strauss & Company. So today we're joined by Sophie-Louise Fröhlich and Wilhelm van Rensburg. And Sophie-Louise, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks very much. I'm going to share my screen now. So there we go. I hope everyone can see that. And off we go. Okay.
Super.
So yeah, we're quite excited to be here today. Thanks for having us, Matthew. And one of the things we are going to talk about is, of course, mid-century modern furniture specifically. And what I didn't realize until last year, October, is that Wilhelm is an undercover collector. So we'll be looking at his thoughts and views on the category as well. Just to guide everyone, we have some talking points. So we'll look at, we've got 2 specific pieces from the May sale we're looking at. And what we'll do is we'll look at the designer, we'll contextualize the piece within the period that it was designed in. And then we'll actually have a little discussion on the actual lot. So no further ado, our first piece is lot 283. It's the Italian first edition P40 lounge armchair, which was designed by Osvaldo Borsani for Techno, and price point is 40 to 50,000. So who was Osvaldo Borsani? Well, he was an Italian, of course, and his father actually was a cabinet maker. Gaetano Borsani had his own atelier, which is called Atelier de Verado, and the young Borsani actually learned from his father, was in the atelier, so he would have picked up on cabinet making skills and what went into producing these. Gaetano actually focused on predominantly Art Deco, so that's quite interesting, especially when we look at what his son produced later on. And his main designer in the atelier at one point was Gino Maggioni, who was quite heavily influenced by the Jugendstil. So Borsani actually went off then to study art, fine art, at the Accademia di Belle Arti de Pera, and he graduated in 1931. 2 years later, he was invited to join 2 other architects to design Casa Minima, which was for, I think it was the 5th Biennale in Milan at the time. And that's actually the first time he got critical acclaim. He won a silver medal for that, and started to be known, or a little bit, his name got out there, as it were, amongst the design community. He then went back and he studied architecture as well. So he's quite an interesting person from that point of view, because you've got this fusion of cabinet making from a family point of view, you've got the fine art, and you've got the architecture on top of it. And of course, Wilhelm, I'm sure you'll agree, a lot of the designers of the time actually have especially an architectural background. Now, right. I think we forget about that, yeah. And it's quite interesting actually from a draftsman point of view, isn't it, when you look at some of those watercolors that they use and how that feeds into the designs that they create. So he went back and studied architecture in Milan. He graduated in 1956. And in 1953, he opened up Techno. So Techno was a company together with his twin brother. And the basis for Techno was to have an original idea which fulfilled the need, which very much fits into the post-1945 World War II train of thought, I suppose, for lack of a better word, and this idea that furniture needed to serve a purpose, moving away from the frills and frou-frou, as I call it, from previous eras. And he didn't work in isolation. So again, quite a common point, but in his case, 1960s, Vico Magistretti, Eugenio Gelli, and Gio Ponti, of course, were involved with him. 1970s, he brought in Mario Bellini, and 1990s, Guy Olenti, Riccardo Bofill. And actually, what's quite interesting, well, I shall point that out if you can see the cursor, this object here that I'm waving about on was designed by Gio Ponti. So that will be quite interesting because we'll show you a picture later on of what we have available of Gio Ponti on the sale. And to the right, you'll see the offices of Techno. So Techno itself was also very much, they did do design for the home, but it was also primarily office-based, as well as later on in the 1970s, they created a subdivision, which was Technical Innovations. And they actually produced also for Yale University, amongst other universities and school projects, as it were. But you can see very clean, very stark pieces that were designed. Techno P40, what was it? Well, on the left we have the P40 high-back, which is actually the first edition. So that's exactly the chair just in red that we have on offer. And on my right, we've got the later version, which has got the extension to the back. So what I'm, oh, heavens, going backwards, sorry. What I'm looking at is on this side, this back, and on this side, this back. And you'll see here's almost like a fold in the fabric, and that's where you can actually extend the top part out from the bottom part, which supports the back. Another difference, if you'll notice, is the tubular leg over here. And then down here, you'll see a square section leg. So just minor differentiations that we look for when we're looking at specific design furniture. And Techno was well known for also producing these fabulous catalogs and advanced for its time. And of course, the woman had to be used, lounging back, doing absolutely nothing and having a fabulous time. And then to the right, what's quite nice, you've got this idea that this chair opens in a fan-like movement. So it can open and fold again, which was quite innovative for its time. Here we've got a display. Again, it's a later version, so what you can actually see here quite nicely is where it extends out. And the rubber arms, which can either go down or come up, depending how you want to have it. And here's the framework. So you can really see the different components that go into making one of these specific chairs. And of course, within that, the range that Bossani would later on look at. Villa Bossani itself was designed by himself in 1940. Again, it was a collaborative work, for lack of a better word, and it was his home. And the family actually stayed in the villa. This is the famous staircase, which is apparently one of the main features of the house. Up until his death, which was 1985. Actually, 1991 was the first time that the villa was converted into the archive, the Bossani archive as we know today. He actually, I didn't mention this, but he was born in 1911 and died in 1985. And here's the living room, and this is the D70, so it's a sofa, and you can see the exact same mechanism that's being used as in the P40, so that is same concept of moving and coming back together, and that fan-like expression. And what's quite interesting as well are these chairs, which he also designed, the P11 lounge chairs. And then this behind him is the ceramic fireplace, which was actually designed by a friend of his, Lucio Fontana, who he worked with quite closely. So again, different elements being brought into the house, into the space which he lived in. And I don't know about you, Wilhelm, but I think I could live in that. Could you?
Oh, certainly. Very clean and minimal spaces. And what you're basically looking at on this photograph is his daughter and his grandson. It was also the first time that the house was opened during one of the Triennale exhibitions of 2018. And it is on that occasion where this photograph was taken.
Yeah. And what's quite interesting also is, if you think 1940s, he had underfloor heating put in. So that's quite forward thinking actually for the time. And the windows were double glazed, and they used Murano glass for that. So it's got all these interesting little elements that you'd miss if you just wandered through it, I suppose. On the left, we've got the AT16 coat hanger, another one of his designs. And I think overall you get the idea of this very modern, minimalist house or furniture, but which also incorporates a certain warmth to it. I mean, this bedroom, which is the master bedroom, you know, you really feel like you could actually walk in and just sink into one of those chairs after a heavy day. So, and my favorite piece over here is the dressing table, which is just lovely and very relevant today still, I think, considering where we come from. What else did Bazzani do? So on the left, you might recognize the Great Court of the British Museum, for those of you who have been there. One of his architectural works, Casa Minima, to the right, which was done in 1933, as I mentioned. And he also worked together with Gordon Foster on other different projects. For example, Stansted Airport was one of those that they would have collaborated on. The Triennale Design Museum in Milan hosted also in 2018, as you said, with the Villa Wilhelm, the Bazzani retrospective. And this is just a shot from that retrospective. And 300 pieces were exhibited. So that's quite a long and fruitful, I suppose, working life. And I suppose also talks to this whole idea of mass production, doesn't it? So do you want to take us away?
Yeah, so that is the building in which the Triennale is held every 3 years. They started in 1927. Obviously, during the Second World War, there were no exhibitions, but from 1948 onwards, especially, you know, the 8th, 9th, 10, 11, and 12th editions from 1948 to the mid-1960s, those were the highlights, the best exhibitions at the Triennale. And on the next slide, you can see the entrance, the grand entrance hall to that building, and a very typical display of what was on offer on those Triennale exhibitions.
That's quite wonderful. And then you can see on the left-hand side, Norman Foster and Tommaso Bazzani again, who actually co-curated that exhibition. So quite a nice touch, both having obviously one family tie and the other having worked with the master himself. And then just to slot in the Noma's table as an example, again, is industrialization, I would say. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, the chrome, glass, very stark. That's what they were focusing on, I suppose, at that point in time. And it's also quite nice to think, although we're looking at a chair, but to consider other types of furniture as well, not just the chair. Grapher system, Lucia Fontana on the left. Techno was, like I said before, also heavily involved in office and universities and the setups there. So that's quite a nice indication of what they would have been going on about. Also this idea of spatialization and the use of space, and I suppose the negative and the positive spaces, and how to work around that whilst keeping it all very functional. I mean, you get the real sense you can cram a lot of people into this area. And
what on earth is on the right-hand side?
Thank you for asking. The right is a wardrobe which Bazzani actually designed. I think it was walnut. And the doors are actually painted by Fontana. So it's again, it's an example of a fantastic collaboration between the two. And I think also what's quite nice in terms of how the paint has been splashed on, you get that sense of, it's really modernist. I mean, you're kind of thinking little bit slightly vaguely Pollockish, splashing away on his canvases. And that incidentally was on a Phillips auction. So yeah, quite important to remember that we're seeing it in South Africa, which we're very, very grateful for. But these are actually international renowned people or design figureheads that we look at. What do we have next? 1950s. So we're going to contextualize for you. We've got Elvis rocking and rolling away. We've got Pollock, we've got Marilyn, we've got Martha Graham. So obviously in dance, we're moving away from just the ballet and uptight to the very loose and modern, which was quite something in those times. We've got civil rights movement going on, and then of course 1951, Peggy Guggenheim opens up her amazing collection in Venice to the public. And against that backdrop, we've got all this fantastic furniture, don't we, Wilhelm?
Yeah, indeed. So you will see the big names listed there. We started off with the first two lines really referring to the modernists, the 1920s, 30s designers. And because we have Borsani, you know, I thought of listing the major Italian designers. And then next, the Danish designers, we'll get to them as well. And that is typically what their work looked like. But I think we have to start, you know, if you want to understand this period, we have to start at the post-war challenges for designers. And here are just some of the issues at stake at the time. So designers had to adapt all old or existing materials, such as surplus army webbing. They had to deal with new materials, such as plywood, fiberglass, and plastic. And of course, working with these materials, they had to improve manufacturing processes, such as molding. And they had to deal with the increased consumer demands. The ex-servicemen had money to spend. They could buy or rent apartments, and they wanted furniture for those new spaces. And so they also had to cater for a radical change in taste. Here are two examples of the use of the surplus army webbing. On the left, a woven chair with the army webbing by Rensburg. He was a Danish architect, but he settled in America where he became quite famous. And on the right, one of the handful of Swedish designers, Bruno Madsen. When you look at the top of that reclining chair and also at the bottom, you would see the woven strips of the webbing. Next, I'm showing you examples of molded fiberglass. And the slide after this, the molding of plywood. And of course, that is the famous Charles and Ray Eames chair, with the image on the right of a very, very early prototype. Look at the steel leg there at the bottom. And then also look at the manner in which the plywood is used in these two examples. For instance, top right, it's almost referring back to an earlier Art Nouveau style that you see there. Next, we're looking at, and even, you know, early, straight after the war, in 1948, the Museum of Modern Art in New York then launched a competition for especially good design for low-cost furniture. And their brief was very interesting: to design furniture that is adaptable to small apartments and houses, well designed yet moderate in price and easy moved and or stored. In other words, furniture that is planned for modern living. The winner of that competition happened to be Charles Eames, and you saw that installation shot at the museum. But the term that is commonly used to describe this period is called mid-century modern, and it is an all-encompassing umbrella term that includes graphic design, interior design, industrial design, architecture, urban planning, landscape design, and the like. So the Americans tend to appropriate the title and then refer to Danish modern or Italian modern. That's really the term used now. Mentioning architecture, this is typically what the houses looked like after the war. And these are two examples of the famous case study houses in America in 1945. On the left, Pierre Koenig overlooking, you'll see the house, a lot of glass, overlooking Los Angeles in the distance, the skyline of Los Angeles. And on the right, the famous, again, Charles Eames, and his case study house that you see there. Okay. And I mentioned, you know, the change of lifestyle. There you have a family on the go, husband ready getting to work, the children eating breakfast on the way to school, and the wife, very interesting. Look at the picture below. She's off to the shops where there were consultants helping her to choose furniture for her house, which I found quite quaint.
Yeah.
Then the characteristics of mid-century modern, here are a couple of them. These are the concepts we deal with. It's more organic than formal, a lot of use of natural materials and colors, clean, simple, minimal, uncluttered, and integration with nature, so inside, outside. And of course, that makes for light and airy spaces. Ample windows, glass walls, open floor plans. This is all from this time. And you have the post and beam design rather than the bulky interior weight-carrying walls, and very functional as well. There are basically three different styles, very distinctive styles: the biomorphic style, the machine style, and the handcrafted style. On the left, you have examples of the biomorphic style. The couch there, as well as the coffee table, they were both designed by Vladimir Kagan, Russian who moved to New York and got quite famous there. The example in the middle, I think, is an interesting one because you can see one feature of mid-century modern furniture is the sculptural nature. That is an example of Paul Kladenhorn, and it is almost like a modern piece of sculpture that you see there. On the right,
say that because, sorry to interrupt, but I'm so pleased you say that because I think often we forget about the chair or design being actually design, and we just look at the functionality of the piece and not that it could be or can be like a sculptural piece. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, they articulate the space, I think, quite beautifully. On the right, a typical example of what we would call the machine style, and the next style would, the next slide would show examples of the handcrafted style. And I think this was probably the most popular style of the three, simply because people could relate to it. You know, the warmth of the wood and the likes. Now, you mentioned Borsani studying at the academy, but I thought of looking at other design training institutions, and the people are basically spoiled for choice in Milan. You know, it is the design capital of Europe, if not the world. And here are just the top 6 ones. There are many more. These training institutions obviously bolstered by the likes of, if you can show the second slide, the next slide, by design fairs in Milan. The big Milan Triennale, as I mentioned earlier on, starting in 1927, it's still ongoing. And the Milan Furniture Fair, or nowadays it's called the Milan Design Week, started in 1963, and very sort of spectacular events. Look at that installation, for example. This is what visitors would encounter when they go to the Design Week in Milan. The next one also gives you a good idea of the installation, the inviting nature of these fairs. Next we have.
I suppose this one also, Wilhelm, it makes it quite fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed. There is a playfulness about it, and an innovative nature of, you know, the layout and so on. Now, we are also going to look at a Danish designer later on, and I thought, you know, also to list the institutions catering for design students. The Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, virtually every single Danish designer went through that, including my favorite, Van Yule, my favorite designer. Clara Klint was the head of Department of Furniture. His own stuff was quite stodgy at the time, but his students really explored the possibilities of modern Danish design. The School of Interior Design, also an important one. Van Yule also taught at that School of Interior Design, the Institute of Design, and of course the Cabinet Makers Guild, active between 1927 and 1967. This sort of a growth point of creative design, of modern design in Europe, quickly found its way over the Atlantic, and major exhibitions were staged. We mentioned 1948, the Museum of Modern Design, 1954 in Chicago. The Metropolitan had an exhibition in 1960 called The Arts of Denmark, and 1968, 2 Centuries of Danish Design, that was at the Victoria and Albert Museum. So it reached a global audience. Van Yule, as I mentioned, my favorite designer, and of course a book, an entire book on his house. He was also an architect, just like Borsani. He only built 5 houses, domestic architecture. This, for instance, is his study that you're looking at, the furniture he all designed. The next one would look at the dining room on the right, and a working space in his study on the left. You'd have the bedroom. Look at those drawers on the right there with a beautiful use of color there. And on the next slide, you would see the seating area in the bedroom on the left. And then a chair that we sold, I think, October last year in Cape Town.
Yeah, correct.
The chair on the right. Apart from the institutions, also bolstered by journals and magazines. The Italian one, Domus, of course, the best known one, the leading one, if you like, started in 1938 by Gio Ponti. You mentioned his name previously. And what you're looking at there is a facsimile edition published by Taschen. They also published a facsimile of the American version, Arts and Architecture, dealing with sort of modern American design.
Okay, lovely. So shall we have a look at the Barzani and just talk that through, I suppose? Let's see what we've got. Okay, so the P40, as we mentioned earlier, it folds and it opens like a fan. And I suppose the idea behind it also was that it was a retake on the old chaise longue, as you know. So the Victorians would have had a jolly good fright when they saw this, probably. So what's quite interesting here, we have it completely open. Here we have it semi-closed and upright, and then completely closed. So actually this part folds underneath the chair, and here you can see the structure. So when a piece of design walks through the door, and it's a furniture piece, what do I look for? I look for, has it been marked? Which of course not always is the case, because as we know, prototypes, the early prototypes aren't necessarily always marked. But in this case, so we've got the T for techno, and then we've got the Milano Barreda label on the bottom. What's quite fun is, and I'm sure you found that as well, Wilhelm, as a buyer or collector, is sometimes it's not as obvious as it is on this chair. So sometimes you've actually got to like really go on a search mission. It's almost like Easter. You've got to find the Easter egg somewhere in amongst all the upholstery and the metal, don't you find?
Yeah, no, it's very true, because that is when you go to antique dealers and second-hand furniture shops. I always carry a torch with me, because I know, and old jeans, a pair of old jeans, because you're going to have to get underneath a piece of furniture and pull out all the drawers and look left, right, and center everywhere for these either labels or paper labels, or little metal discs, or sometimes stamps, and sometimes they are branded logos. So it is quite, and there's no a better joy than finding these.
Yeah, that's quite exciting.
The real thing.
Yeah, completely. So, and I think only collectors and people who actually enjoy that kind of thing understand the joy when the shriek comes. It's, oh, I found it, Everyone goes, what has she found? But as a collectible, Helen, also, I mean, we look at condition when we take these pieces in. I mean, this piece is in immaculate condition. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not a scratch. But interesting for me, because there's always this dichotomy. Some people enjoy having an original piece, but they don't mind if there's a scratch or a tear. So if we're thinking Eames, for example. Sometimes the leather isn't 100%. You know, there's like a tear or something. Is that something that puts you off as a collector? So if you were to come in, like I say, this one's pristine, but if it wasn't, would that put you off? If it was something
No,
that
no. Of course, you know, first prize would be something in immaculate condition, but one has to remember, you know, that one lives with these pieces. So you're going to sit on it, you're going to lie on it, your children are going to climb on it, your pets, they might sort of scratch it, the kids might spill, and so you just have to, you know, that's life, and so one doesn't have to be too precious about it. You know, I always try to get original items, but you know, sometimes a licensed reproduction would suffice. So I'm happy with that, and it also indicates, you know, you mentioned the leather and so on. It indicates that the chair's been used. You know, it's very livable. There might be a little chip, a little scratch. But that really doesn't put me off. I think it is important to care for the furniture. If it's not French polished, you know, sort of polish it, dust it, and look after it. Yes.
Yeah. And then, well, that's one of the points you've also mentioned is the sitting in the actual chair. Is that something you do? Because I know that's, I mean, when this chair came in, I will admit, I did gently get into it and test it just to make sure it was comfortable. And I'm glad to report it is very comfortable. So
Yeah, no, incidentally,
yeah.
I read somewhere, you know, about this particular chair that it can, see, because it's articulated completely, you know, it can adopt something like more than 400 positions. I don't know how true that is, but that's certainly documented in one of the books I consulted.
Yeah, no, I read that as well. And I thought to myself, they must have measured every little
Yeah.
millimeter to move. Anyway, so let's move on to our next chair, which is a Danish chair. So that's straight down your alley. Jørgen Hovelscoff, designed in 1968, the harp chair. So here's Hovelscoff. Unfortunately, there's not much known about him, so it's quite a short little bio we've got. He's born in 1935. He passed away in 2005, so it's not too long ago. And here he's sitting on his chair. It was first called the Viking chair, and it was renamed later to the harp chair, or sometimes it's also referred to as the string chair. But why I included this, so this is from the Viking Museum in Denmark, and you can actually see the back. Well, I hope you can. It would resemble the back of that chair. And to my mind, I suppose that's where that connection comes in. And you had these two slides, so talk us through that and explain a little bit.
Yeah, because you know, when I looked at these images, I thought, well, okay, now this might be the ropes holding up the sails there, in the image in the diagram on the left, and when you look on the image on the right, those oars, you know, the linear quality of those. Features of the Viking ship, you know, apart from the bow and the stern that you pointed out. I think that might also have served as an inspiration to use those strings in the harp chair.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because it ties in with what you said. A chair can be sculptural, and I think this is certainly one of those instances where you really can feel that modernist sculptural feeling quality coming through. But I had a sleepless night, as I told you. So I was wondering, harp chair, Viking chair, harp chair, what is the connection? I couldn't work it out. So anyway, off I went in the middle of the night and decided to research a little bit. And it was quite interesting. So in the 10th century, there is no harp per se, or the Vikings weren't really associated with music until quite late on when Christianity took over. But this is from the 10th century, and it's actually this is a type of harp, and it's Gunnar who was dropped into a pit of snakes, and he hoped that by playing the harp he would appease the snakes, which didn't work. So his harp, the harp player couldn't have been too good. But the point is that it's one of the references we find in the stories, and I mean, there are so many stories and Norse tales that are prevalent in that area. So that was quite a nice connection going back to the harp, and then obviously here the actual harp. This is just one of the drawings that Hovelscoff did. And but the other thing that was interesting for me was the attachment of the string and the way actually when you look at the chair, it supports the body in quite a unique way. So if you compare it to the Bosani, which is quite a firm structure, I mean, it's solid. There's nothing see-through to it. It's solid. It's mechanized. There we go. Now you've got this complete opposite in the 60s, where you've got this play of body versus string holding. And the funny thing is, so I saw my first hop chair 11 years ago when I started off in this industry, and I was terrified to sit in it. I thought, I can't do this. And it was so funny because 11 years later, this chair walks through the door. Well, not by itself, it gets carried through. But someone said to me, don't you want to sit in there? I said, no, definitely not. But it's such a stupid mental thing because actually these strings are they're quite thick and solid. There's no way your body's going to plonk right through it, you know. So it's quite weird how the mind actually plays with you on those. Anyway, so we have circle chair and the stool, which is modeled on the harp, which Hovelskopf also designed. And then here's another lounge chair that he designed, just an interior shot of what that would have looked like or been in. But the 1960s as a whole, well, we had Woodstock, we had the first man on the moon, and we had the Beatles. So how do you think everything falls into that, into that era?
I think there was a shift in, in design, and some of the features I'm listening over here. So it was a period of provocation, of revolution, of extremes. The whole idea of swinging London, great fun to be had there in the 1960s, and of course it was the time of pop and op art, and those played right into the hands of the designers of the time, especially in terms of the use of color, bright colors, and patterns, especially from op art. You have famous stores opening its doors like Habitat and Biba, and of course Terence Conran, all of them still going. I'm not too sure about Biba. But the big thing was the advances in the chemical industry in terms of plastics, because you have all those vinyl flooring, formica, melamine, Rylon, nylon, terylene, and the likes, all synthetic materials, and experimentation with them, especially in terms of the shape of the furnitures. And so you would have the cone chair, and the ball chair, and the bubble chair, and the tongue chair, and the basket chair, and the likes. And here are some examples. I want to draw your attention to the image at the bottom left. That is the famous tongue chair, purportedly based on Mick Jagger's of the Rolling Stones, his famous tongue. But again, you know, sculptural, number one, but also functional. And some of the others. Top right, you have the cone chair, for instance.
Wilhelm, isn't this the tongue chair? Isn't this the tongue?
Yeah, and also the one the sort of below it to the left. That's also Vernon Panton, also a Danish architect. Yeah, there you go.
Lovely. And then, of course, we've got all these houses buying up the licenses. So Herman Miller, Casino, Cartel, Vitra. I think probably if you're buying contemporary furniture today, you'd be more familiar with these names than necessarily the actual name of the chair. So that was quite nice doing this presentation together. I think it was just going through those names again and seeing what was what in the zoo. So a lot of what we see today comes or has been manufactured through these houses. And as you were saying earlier, the serial numbers will be there, or the labels will be there, or something that will indicate to you what you're looking at, and that it's actually an authentic reproduction. So shall we have a quick squiz through this? I suppose when you look at it from the top, it gives you quite a different angle. I suppose it almost feels like you're in a boat versus the other way when it's upright, doesn't it? Okay, Willem.
No.
Okay, so
Yeah.
basically, yeah, basically we'll move on from there then and look at what the other lots are on the May auction. So we've got quite a nice selection throughout. We've got the CH445, which is Wegner on the left. We've got a Danish design table. We've got the LC1, which of course is Corbusier and goes back to 1920s Bauhaus and that whole era. Gioponti represented over here. Quite a nice little piece, the table plus 4 chairs which match and go to it. And Gioponti, of course, also influenced Fornasetti, which I think you on the Joburg sale, you had a Fornasetti piece last year, didn't you, in November?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
The plates, yes, the Adam and Eve, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And that's also quite important to remember is that design doesn't only encompass furniture, it encompasses ceramics, even silver. So here we've got the centerpiece, the Antipodi reversible centerpiece. Again, clean, classic lines, and playing with the idea of light. So you've got the light reflecting off that surface in different ways. So those are all on the May sale, which are quite exciting. And then we thought, ladies and gentlemen, we'll do an open discussion. So we'll just look at the relevance of mid-century modern and then building a collection. So what do you think is the relevance of mid-century modern today, Wilhelm?
You know, I think it's just sort of a completely different look. It's very distinctive. You know, you immediately spot the chair, the sculptural piece in a space. And I think, you know, it will become, in my mind, increasingly more important, you know, because buying this type of furniture, I think reduces the carbon footprint of the world, you know, so you don't have to go to great lengths to manufacture it, for instance. It's right there. You can buy it on an auction or in an antique store.
Yeah, I think especially for the younger generation, we're quite drawn to this whole mid-century modern contemporary look, and it's quite interesting how it's actually all come back. And I think we also forget sometimes the prices that these pieces can fetch. I mean, we don't see a lot of really fantastic mid-century modern in South Africa, so it's really exciting when we do have something like the P40, or like the finial that we had in October, which was designed in 1956. But it really, I mean, these different designers all working in different periods, and of course we've only looked at a small percentage. I mean, there are so many names out there, and one of the things that actually I thought of when we were looking at Hovelskop was how many designers are out there that have been forgotten, and are they going to be discovered later on, you know, in later parts of 2020, for example.
Yeah. You mentioned the prices of these items, and next time you're in New York, just do yourself a favor to go to those mid-century modern shops there. And basically, what you have to do is you have to add another naught,
Yeah.
And you have to change the rand sign into a dollar sign. That's what you're going to pay in America for these pieces.
It's the same in Copenhagen. I mean, you walk into those shops and you spoke for choice. You don't actually know where to look first. And it's all gorgeous and it's all amazing. But like you say, it's all got, it's not quite as bad as the dollar, but it's still quite something when you look at those.
Yeah.
Building a collection. I mean, you've got a collection, and I know you love finial and the Danes and Scandinavian furniture, maybe I should rather categorize. How would you go about building a collection? I mean, from my side, I would definitely say that when people buy, they've got to be quite discerning as to what you've got to buy what you like. And you've got to decide, are you just wanting originals in your collection, or are you willing to incorporate reproduction? Because I mean, obviously at this stage, there's at home and all the normal shops that are bringing out all of these copies that are just being thrown out there. And what we find in the industry often is, especially for example, like a Vasily chair, which Marcel Breuer designed, you know, if you don't measure up the chair, same with the harp chair, actually, incidentally, if you don't measure it and make sure that the height is actually the correct height, and that I suppose that's also where Casina and all of Knoll and all of those websites come in really handy, because you get the exact measurements of each chair and each table. You can very easily end up with a fake because, or should I say reproduction piece, because you actually, it looks right, but it isn't right. So talk us through how you would put, or what did you do when you put your collection together? Where did you start and where did you end up?
Well, it's an interesting story. You know, we moved some 20 years ago, we moved from Melville to Linksfield. And in Melville, of course, at that stage, it was all cottagey furniture. And when we moved into the Linksfield house, the house rejected the cottagey furniture. They didn't want it. And so what I did was I literally put those pieces on the pavement like they do in America. I think it's called Mungo. And by the end of the day, everything was gone. And then I said to my wife, okay, now what? And she said, well, let's try mid-century modern. So the first purchases were sort of not quite on target, but you know, you develop a sense of what you're looking for quite early on. And so it's to look at the structure to see the potential of a chair, because many of these pieces are reupholstered. You know, you have to look past the stripes, past the floral fabric on it. And that's the other fun thing about collecting. You know, then you page through the interior decorating books and you look at the color schemes, you look at the fabric being used, the natural materials, and then you can sort of play with all of that and put something great together. So the structure, solid wooden structure, is paramount, and what you can do with that, you know, because it's just a piece of fabric that can make all the difference. And then, of course, I am always looking for tags, for labels, for stamps, for branded logos or whatever. Otherwise, you have to rely on the integrity of the dealer. Dealers often go to great lengths to research the manufacturers, the dates, and the likes. And it's interesting to build up the documentation of all of that. My next challenge, I think, would be look at South African manufacturers. You mentioned the unknown ones. And later on at the end, I can perhaps put up a list so that we can look at those as well.
How many pieces are in your collection, Wilhelm?
Oh, no, I don't bother to count.
Too many.
Life is too short.
And then another interesting point is, do you sell, I mean, have you, whilst you were building up your collection, did you sell lesser, well, let's call them lesser pieces, or the pieces that you and the wife didn't like as much, to collect a piece that you really enjoyed that cost a little bit more?
No. We never sell. You know, we sort of the policy is more to replace it with sort of like a more upmarket, you know, coffee table or whatever. You know, and of course it's often more expensive. But we've never sold any of these pieces. We love them too much.
Okay, good. So then, to end off, you had a couple of books that we thought we'd just run through, and I suppose that's another point is I find quite interesting. I mean, a lot of clients that do come through the doors are quite informed, and which is really nice. It's lovely because, you know, we can't know everything. So it's always great when someone else can come in and give a little bit more input, or there's a nice little story that comes in that you weren't aware of. But I suppose some of the books one can refer to.
Yeah, so I'm a diehard pedagogue, so I believe in books, you know, and buying books. So at the top you see the best one. If you can afford one, buy that one. Mid-Century Modern Complete, as the title suggests, came out last year. Thames and Hudson published it. Underneath that, those three I think are very important books. They were all published by the Victoria and Albert Museum in London to accompany big, large-scale exhibitions. They, of course, since okay, and then these are just 1950s houses from the popular House and Garden, the British magazine there. And the 1950s, I like the one on the left because, you know, the do-it-yourself idea, I think, is best illustrated in that little book. The next slide, the different interior decorating books, and they tend to use the word retro. You know, you often find that in the titles there. There's even a magazine called Modernism, published in America, I think once every 2 months, that one comes out. And on the left, 1960s, the G-Plan furniture. We mentioned Le Corbusier, so that's the catalogue raisonné at the top there of his furniture designs, or the different designs, and at the bottom the 4-volume Charlotte Perriand collected works. She was, of course, a prolific a designer as well. She worked with the lot that we have on sale in May, was designed by Charlotte and Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, a cousin of Le Corbusier. And Charlotte referred to the three of them as 3 fingers on one hand when they design furniture.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a great reference, actually. Yeah, so I think, I mean, I think it's such a vast topic, mid-century modern. One could probably go on for days, but I think it's quite a nice point to end off on. So it was great chatting to you, Wilhelm. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that.
You're welcome. You are welcome. Yeah. If there are any questions.
Yeah, we'll hand over to Matthew, if Matthew can field the questions for us. And Matthew?
Yeah. Hello. Sorry, let me just start my video. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. You know, I think the point of it's for too long. You know, we haven't been, I think, paying attention to the wonderful design. And Sophie-Louise, I must just say that since you've joined, we've had you know, you've really opened my eyes to you know, I think I attended a lecture of yours on the notion of a chair, and you said, you know, your principle of you know, of a chair is I think really interesting, and you know, extends out into the perspective that we've got for appreciating these really remarkable pieces of furniture and design that you know, we become invisible in our lives, and so I think it's, you know, to elevate these objects to the full attention that they deserve is really a wonderful opportunity. So thank you so much. And Wilhelm, it's always I know about your undercover collecting habits. So it's really fascinating to have you talk to us about it. So thank you very much for that. That's really fantastic. I'm going to just open up the floor. We've got a couple more minutes before 5, so I'm just going to open up the floor to see if there's any questions, and just to remind everybody that we've for the latecomers that we've been joined by Wilhelm van Rensburg and Sophie-Louise Fröhlich today, talking about mid-century modern and as a well, not a new category, but a category of a collectible category of furniture, and how it's really retro has become vogue again. So which has been really fascinating to hear. We've got also, ladies and gentlemen, I think if he can just get it right, we've got our guest that's going to be joining us on Friday. I think, oh no, he logged in and he logged out. So I think he's just giving everything a test drive. So just a reminder of the rest of the week's programs. On tomorrow, Sophie-Louise, do you want to just introduce tomorrow who we're going to be having?
We're going to be, yeah, no, it's so tomorrow is really exciting. Vanessa Phillips, who of course is the doyenne of the decorative arts in South Africa and Africa, dare I say, is going to be talking to Joanna Hardy from the UK. So we're very, very privileged, and thank you, Vanessa, for organizing that. And I'm sure you will have us spellbound throughout. So really, ladies and gentlemen, if you can come, you should come, because these are two greats that are going to be chatting about jewelry and the trends, and it's just going to be amazing. Thanks, Matthew.
Let me just turn my mute. And then on Thursday, so tomorrow, Vanessa Phillips and Joanna Hardy, and then on Thursday, we're going to be joined by three contemporary artists that we've got on the sale. Sanel Achenbach is going to be joined by Jake Aikman and Georgina Gratrix, and they're going to be interviewed by Sean O'Toole. So that's going to also be a really, really fantastic talk. I think really not to be missed. It's always nice to have the artists joining us. And Sean is really a master of the interview format. So I'm looking very forward to hearing that one. And then on Friday, we've also got another special guest, a familiar face to Strauss & Company, Dendy Easton, joining us from the UK, British paintings expert Dendy Easton, and another veteran of the Antiques Roadshow, like Joanna Hardy. So today is really, I suppose, going to be quite a star-studded lineup for tomorrow. And I see we just got a question, same time tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to share my screen again, just so you can see what where we've been today. This is our virtual talkabout, and we've been joined by Sophie-Louise Fröhlich and Wilhelm van Rensburg. And it's going to be same time, same place tomorrow. You can use the same meeting ID. So that's, I think it's just important to let everybody know the same meeting ID from the blaster you can use to access the meeting tomorrow. And again, we're going to have Joanna Hardy and Vanessa Phillips. So that's going to be really special. And again, I think I'm going to use this opportunity to sign off and say thank you for joining us at Strauss & Company and our Zoom April-May talkabouts leading up to our upcoming May sale. So really, really fantastic to see everybody. I see we've got a talk on our, somebody's asking a question that they're saying desperately, we'd love to have a talk on South African designers. So I think we're gonna take that one into the memory banks. We're dealing, we on Friday, so after with Dendy's talk, we're gonna announce the program for next week. So once we've got this week out the way, we're going to have the programming for next week, but we just thought we'd get this one out the way first. And again, it's really been so wonderful to have you. We just Leslie Cohen saying thank you so much to everybody, and it's really been a spectacular turnout today. And I want to thank everybody again for giving us their time, and for Sophie-Louise and Wilhelm for really, as I said, every time this happens, we get to bring these wonderful objects on our sales to life. So,
Matthew, just one quick thing. The South African designers, I'll pick up the email of that query from the chat platform, and I'll respond to that. I'll send the list.
Okay, fantastic, cool. So that's. I'm just going to send a message. I'm just going to send them privately your email, Wilhelm, and then they can correspond there.
Yes, please.
Right. Fantastic. So I'm just going to give just a last couple of minutes because I see there's one or two questions coming in, and then I think we're going to sign off from there. Again, ladies and gentlemen, let me just. I just want to remind you, lastly, just before we log off for today, tomorrow we're going to be joined by Joanna Hardy, absolute expert in international jewelry, and another stalwart of the Antiques Roadshow is going to be joined by Vanessa Phillips, and they're going to be talking about the international trends in jewelry, using some of the lots on our sale as a departure point, and then we are going to, on Thursday, we've got joined by Jake Aikman, Sanel Achenbach, and Georgina Gratrix, being interviewed by Sean O'Toole, looking at some of their works in sessions 4 and 5. And then finally, Ian Hunter and Dendy Easton, again of the Antiques Roadshow fame, British paintings specialist Dendy Easton and Ian Hunter are going to be talking about British and continental, and looking at some of the exceptional examples and exceptional results that we've had in the past, as well as some of really lovely works that we've got coming up again in sessions 4 and 5. So that's going to be quite a treat and a star-studded appearance this week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I see we're coming to 5 o'clock. And I'd say thank you very much for coming. Same time, same place tomorrow. And you can use the meeting ID that you used today. So it's the same link for every talk for the next 3 weeks. All right. Again, Wilhelm and Sophie-Louise, thank you so much. And again, see you tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Thanks, Wilhelm.
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.